Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know this time of year in particular, there's a lot of what needs to get done before the winter. So I'm glad that you've chosen to spend your lunch break here with us today and hear about the North Country Rising planning process, as well as the plan itself, and some of the steps that the council and some of our partners are taking to move forward some of the goals and ideas that came up during this planning process. My name is Stacy Dahl, and I am the Community Resiliency Planner at North Country Council. And I'm joined today with my colleague and friend, Kayla Tavares, who is our Community and Economic Development Planning Coordinator, as well as my friend and our partner, Nathan Carroll from Cardinal Consulting. Both of them are going to give a brief update on some work that they've been doing around this plan and complementary work to some of the strategies that you'll hear me talk about today. A few things before we get started. Number one, as I mentioned, as people were entering, let's try to keep ourselves on mute. There's a lot of folks that are kind of coming and going, and so we want to make sure there's no background distractions or noise. Number two, we're going to ask that you hold the questions till the end. And I understand sometimes that's hard because something might pop up that I say or that somebody says, and you're like, wait a minute, I'll lose it later. Feel free to use the chat to post your questions, and Kayla and Nathan are going to try to kind of keep an eye on those. But we do have a lot to cover, and I want to make sure that we get through it all. And then as time allows, we'll answer questions. And again, if for some reason we run out of time, you'll have my email. Please reach out to me. I'd love to have a conversation with you on any questions or thoughts that you have that we don't have time to address. The final thing I want to say is that we are recording this, and we will have the presentation portion of this hopefully live on our website. We had a few folks that wanted to be here that couldn't be in person. So we're hoping that we can make this available to view at another time. So you're welcome to share that with folks that you know that couldn't be here today. So I just want to start by giving a really quick overview of who North Country Council is, in case you're not familiar with the work that we do or only interacted with us in a few different ways. We are both a regional planning commission and an economic development district. And we are one of 9 regional planning commissions in the state. We're established by RSA. So, and that's the state statutes here in the state of New Hampshire. And as you can see on the map, the big difference between our planning commission region and our economic development district is that our economic development district in light yellow covers all of Grafton County, whereas our planning commission only covers about half of it or 2/3 of it. We also cover northern Carroll County and all of Coos County. There's about 50 communities within our planning region, and we do everything from land use planning, assisting towns with master plans and zoning ordinances, transportation planning, environmental planning, and economic development planning. The work that we've been doing over the past 18 to 20 months has come out of the CARES Act through a grant through the Economic Development Administration. And this was really asking the economic development districts to take a comprehensive look of the impacts to both community, business, and the economy that we were seeing from COVID-19, and to assess what was going right, what was going wrong, what are our biggest needs that were emerging out of the pandemic, and to create some strategies and some guidance on how we might want to move forward to not just recover from the pandemic, but be more resilient in the face of other challenges that might be facing our region or our country down the road. So the vision that we had for this was to develop strategies and solutions for a more resilient, inclusive, and caring economy that can withstand, adapt, innovate, and transform in the face of both natural and human disasters. Tall order, but We met so many great souls and like really great ideas, amazing resiliency stories over the last 2 years that it really gives me hope for what this region can accomplish even during the most challenging of times. Our planning process included several different steps. The first one, and I know we've got folks on the call that were part of this, we did a series of focus group meetings within economic sectors. So we brought people together that all sort of worked in the same economic industry. And we had conversations on how do you define resiliency for your industry? Like, what does it look like? What are the greatest assets and needs, not just as it relates to financial capital, but all forms of community capital, including social and natural capital and intellectual capital. And then as a group, we would co-create solutions. Folks would throw out project ideas or ways that we could collaborate to recover from what we were experiencing during the pandemic. We developed summary reports from these focus group conversations and made them available on our website and shared them through our newsletters. We gathered quantitative data, whatever we could find, by talking to the state and looking at national data, as well as any data that folks could provide us from their industry. We developed case study reports that I'll show you in a moment. And again, gathering these stories, how did people shift and change not only the business that they were in, but maybe a new business that they created during the pandemic. We also started, and we still have a lot of work to do in this area, of cross-sector collaboration. So there were a lot of things that we heard in, say, the food and agriculture conversation that we also heard in arts and culture, that we also heard in healthcare. So one of the things that we really recognized as a planning commission and as an economic development district is we need to be able to bring people together and hold conversations on topics that it doesn't matter what sector you work in. This is a challenge in our region, such as housing, which we'll hear a little bit about later. The other thing that we wanted to do was make sure that we had a plan that we could present online that people could refer to. A lot of times when we're applying for grant money or working on project development, we might be asked by funders, well, where is the plan? Where's the justification behind this project that you're bringing forward? So we wanted to make sure that there was an actual hard copy plan that all of you, anyone that's in this region, can use, you can refer to if the project that you're working on and developing is talked about in this plan. So as I go through the strategies today, if you're like, yeah, this aligns with work that we're trying to do in our business, in our community, refer to this plan as you're working on grant applications. And please feel free to reach out to the council if you have any questions on that. The focus groups that we held, just a little bit more detail, the different sectors of the economy that we brought together. And granted, most of this had to happen on Zoom, right? Because it was right in the heart of the pandemic. But we talked to folks in food and agriculture, arts and culture, outdoor recreation and the environment, education, healthcare, small business. And then with child and family services, what we realized is that there were already focus groups or groups collaborating and working together on child and family services. So we showed up at their meetings and we asked them questions in the meetings that they were already holding. We had over 200 participants involved in the focus groups, and then we did a series of key informant interviews. And what I mean by that is we were on the phone, we were meeting people in person, we sat at several different farmers markets and arts and cultural events, talking to people on the streets, talking to vendors, just getting an idea and a sense of what was happening. I will say that if you have a chance, it's a pretty robust read. It's about 75 pages, the full plan. I will say that most of the verbiage in the plan are the words and the sentiments from the people in the region. All I did was organize it. So this was really a plan written by the people for the people in our region. Some of the most common assets that we heard mentioned, again, didn't really matter which sector of our economy or if it was just someone we were talking to at an event, we heard that social, natural, and cultural capital is what keeps our region rich. And even though sometimes we don't necessarily have the financial capital, we utilize these forms of capital to get things done. And that during the pandemic, it was really relying on these or seeing how these areas like natural and cultural capital might have been challenged, that it kind of set up a red flag that we need to make sure that in the future, we don't lose what we have while working towards what we need. We also heard quite a bit like our Yankee ingenuity, like we're not afraid to roll up our sleeves and help each other out and figure things out. I know Chuck is with us today, and Chuck said to me, he goes, listen, it's not the first time the North Country has seen challenges. Like we're born for this. And we really heard that in the stories that we were kind of getting from folks at these different places where we were setting up to have conversations. On the flip side, some of the common needs that we heard, first and foremost, was we need to be able to support the basic needs of our people. A lot of the funding that we're seeing and a lot of the planning work that we've done and a lot of the direction is around economic development, and that is traditionally meant retaining and growing jobs. But I think all of us can agree you can't retain jobs, let alone grow them, if we don't have the housing, the child care, the reliable broadband, health care, people having access to food. Like we have to take a more holistic approach to the way in which we not only identify these complex challenges, but if they're complex, we need to have complex solutions as well. So some of it was about how do we remove silos? How is it that if you can get funding for one category of challenge or one category of need, that you get funding or support from another one and marry them together? Like, again, how do we work across sector and tear down some of the silos for the things that we're seeing? The other thing that I want to say here under common needs, and we heard this over and over again, it's not like a whole new set of challenges emerged. There definitely were some, but what we heard more often was that these challenges already existed in the North Country, but they were exacerbated by the pandemic. They were things that we already knew were tough, and they just became harder during this time. So I think that's very telling of the region. And I think it just gives us a little bit more emphasis to like focus on these things, right? Because they became that much harder during this time. We also, as I mentioned earlier, we did case studies, and all of these are on our website. So they're accessible for you to view, to go through. We had an intern last summer working with the council. And what it was is every time we met with somebody or had a focus group and they would say, it'd be really great if we could do X, Y, and Z, but I don't know that we have any really great examples in New Hampshire, or I heard of them doing it out in Arizona, but I haven't heard of it anywhere else. So we had our intern focus on these topics that were important to the industry and do some research and create these case study reports so that we can learn from the best practices of others around the country and within those industries. We also, as I said, met with people to gather their stories of resiliency. I think one of the ones that sort of emerged time and time again, we heard nationally, that the great resignation, but what we were hearing wasn't so much a resignation as it was a transformation. Folks had left one industry or one job, and they weren't sitting on their couch just collecting unemployment. They were taking their unemployment checks and investing it in the new business that they always dreamed of. And now, because either they were laid off or had to take time off, they had time to dream and plan this new business venture. So I don't know that we have all the hard numbers yet. Census data is starting to slowly roll out. We're starting to see more and more quantitative data, but I think it's interesting for us to kind of watch those numbers and see how much loss did we actually see, and how much did we just see new businesses emerge where there might have been lost someplace else. And telling these stories and gathering these stories was great, because I think Kayla can talk to this as well when she's sharing, is it was great to be out in community. I mean, we all felt that impact of social distancing and not being in community when it was safe and where it was safe, to be able to talk to people and have real conversations around what was going on. That was, like we always say, it's the planning process is more important than the plan itself. That was the richest part of the planning process, I think, for our team, was really to talk to people and get to know people out in community. So what I want to touch on is 7 common themes that kind of emerged across all sectors. Again, there's a lot of information in the plan. There's a little bit of detail around strategies and ideas that people had to move things forward. But that would take me more than an hour to go through all of that. So I thought the best use of time would be to talk about these sort of 7 common areas that there are strategies and goals embedded within them in the North Country Rising Plan. And what we hope to do as a planning commission is to continue to help the region, the industries, and the communities address issues within these 7 common themes. And I'll talk about some of the ones that we're doing later on in our presentation. So first and foremost is collaboration and collective impact. And I'm glad Jason's here, because I remember a conversation when we had the arts and culture folks all on Zoom. We were defining resiliency for the arts and culture sector. And at the very end, Jason said, you know, I just want to say it's so good to see my friends and colleagues, because as artists, so many of our venues and so many of our spaces had to close, that artists kind of, you know, retreated within to do some work and to work on their art and their creative craft, but they hadn't seen each other in a while. And, you know, there was this sense of, I can't wait for the next focus group, because we need to have some structure behind coming together within our industry to talk about these challenges. In a rural region, it doesn't make sense to go it alone. So one of the things that we heard across several sectors is, how do we establish a structure, a mission, maybe it's a coalition, something within industries that brings people together? Everyone thinks that collaboration is important, and yet we're all so busy doing our day-to-day job. Nobody has the time to actually facilitate the coming together of collaboration. So there are some ways in which the council is helping do that, and I know other organizations are doing that. It's critical to our economic and recovery resilience to emphasize collaboration, and then talk about, when we do come together and collaborate, what is that bigger collective impact that we have, and how do we measure that? For instance, I talked about social capital. How do we measure social capital? How do we measure natural capital? How is it that we talk about, when we come together to solve an issue, there's a bigger impact to our region than if we go it alone in our individual organizations, businesses, and communities? So a lot of the strategies under this section talk about collaboration, and you'll see that almost every sector that we held focus groups with said we need to have this sort of collaborative structure. The second area that had a lot of conversation around strategies and projects that we need to consider is planning and assessment. Here we are doing an economic recovery and resiliency plan, but what we were identifying is there's a lot of funding coming out for implementation, but hold up, we have a lot of inventorying and assessing to do. You know, if there's money for infrastructure projects, but we haven't assessed the infrastructure that we do have, how do we write a grant application? How do we do project development when we're not quite sure how things are working now? So we heard in outdoor recreation, can we Some people are doing inventory, different groups. Can we bring all that together into one? We heard it within food and agriculture. We know where our farms are, but how are they doing? Do they have what they need? Do they have enough employees? Are they running into issues that their farm is barely hanging on? So it's not just where that farm is located, but assessing how it's operating and where they need help. So there's a couple of things you'll see within the plan document that talk about further planning and assessment. And again, this is an area that, as a planning agency, there's some work that we can do to help move this section of the plan and these ideas forward. One of them in particular that you'll hear me talk about a little bit later is that climate resiliency came up quite a bit in our conversations. Almost every sector and a lot of conversations and interviews we had, folks said, when I think about defining resiliency, we should also be planning for our changing climate. I know it's been a wet week, but we've all experienced another year of drought this summer. In the farming industry, they're really concerned about this conversation. And although we were all concerned about it, when still facing and working within the confines of the pandemic, it was kind of hard to have a conversation around, what else could come in and challenge our region and our economy? So it's not that we deemed it to be unimportant, but we tabled it and said, let's agree to come back to this conversation. And I'm happy to say, I think that's going to be happening in the next year. The next area, and this one's big, there's a lot of words on the screen here. But I think this, not that any one category is more important than the other, but this is something I said in the beginning, and I'm just going to keep coming back to this, is that we have to invest and support in our community backbone systems. Economic development planning just to retain and grow jobs without attracting and investing and supporting in early childhood development and transportation and housing and health and food, it doesn't make sense. And we have workers here now that are struggling with these things. So we're trying to look at how do we get innovative in using financing, support, investment that's coming into the region to grow and retain jobs, and say, well, the only way to do that is if we invest and support in X, Y, and Z. So I'm hopeful that we can continue to have that conversation with folks that want to keep recovering the economy and growing the economy, that this has to go hand in hand with it. And again, Kale will talk about the housing piece a little bit later, but I urge all of us to make sure that as we're putting together project proposals, how is it that a new business also is for housing, also is taking care of childcare, also has, if we're building a new housing development, does it have a child care center? Do they have a garden to grow food at the housing structure? Can we tear down some of these silos, integrate this stuff, and make sure that we're not putting more pressure on our already strained community systems, but that we're investing in them just as much as we're investing in business and job growth. The next category that we heard quite a bit about, and to be honest, I think the conversation can go deeper and wider, is around equity, connectivity, and access. We need to better understand the economic and equity disparities in our region and create plans that are inclusive for everyone, that everyone's voice is being heard. We heard over and over again how the socioeconomics played into people's ability to recover and be resilient. And that might sound like common sense, but it was a real problem during the pandemic. This is one that existed that was exacerbated during this time. I know some of our folks from the North Country Health Consortium, they may be on the call today. They were definitely part of the conversation. We kept talking about the social determinants of health. And let's not separate once again access and equity and the socio part of the economics. Like that is important moving forward. In outdoor recreation, as we are spending a lot of time like telling folks to come to the North Country and inviting people to come to the region, are we being inclusive to everyone? Are our trails accessible to everybody? If not, what is the alternative? How do we make sure that everyone feels welcome and comfortable to be in this region? And again, I think there's a lot more work to do in this area, but you'll see that we started to tackle it and address it in the North Country Rising Plan. The next category is balanced economy. And what we mean by balanced economy is that we need to strengthen the local economy just as much as strengthen our competitiveness in a global economy. And I know that's kind of always been the vision and the drive behind economic development. And yet we realized that when supply chains were down, when things were a little bit more challenged, we had to rely on local. We also know that when we spend that dollar in our local economy, it comes back around, it circulates and really grows a vibrant, economic system in our region. So we need to balance that a little bit more. The other thing that we heard is we need to balance supply and demand, especially as it relates to the tourism economy. We know that that's a huge and very important part of our economy. But if we only make investments in the marketing, promoting, and demand side, the supply side is struggling some. Like, how do we keep up with that many more people coming to the region when our restaurants are closed a couple more days a week, or we're having to spend more money and more time on maintaining trails, or we don't have adequate parking for folks? So just as much as we think about welcoming and bringing people in, because that helps our economy, we also need to think about how are we equally investing in the supply side and the people that are providing services for that economy to exist. And then once again, value, invest, and measure resiliency and growth across all forms of capital. As I said earlier, I get a sense that folks want to make sure that the natural, social, and cultural capital that we do have in abundance, that we keep that we don't lose that as we continue to grow jobs, grow the region, and grow new businesses. Two more to share with you. This one, probably not very shocking, but we had lots of conversations around innovation, education, and workforce development. Some of this was related to our schools. And, how are we creating a culture that values our educators and gives educators in the education system the opportunity to be innovative in how what different models of education are out there. We talked a lot about some of our really great CTE programs. And one of the things that kind of kept coming up over and over again is this hands-on lived experience training and education. Within arts and culture, if the art programs are the first ones to be cut in the school, but local artists are in our community, could those artists become the educators? Like, let's not lose our cultural capital. It's part of what makes this region so abundant and beautiful. So instead of saying, well, we have to cut it for financial reasons, can we reach out to the community of artists and see if we can't do some matchmaking there with artists in the community that can teach those classes and therefore keep that sector of the economy, moving and growing as well. In addition to talking about education in like traditional school settings, we also talked about the importance for business development, transition, innovation, workforce training. How is it that there's lots of great organizations, some of which are on this call, that provide support to businesses to do some of this? How do we keep that front and center? Because I think there's a lot of things that businesses learn during this time, and they're kind of looking now for new training, They're looking for ways to like innovate and try something new. So how do we create a supportive environment for that and invest some funding into making sure that that happens? The last section, or kind of big common theme that came up in this plan, is around culture, climate, and quality of life. Very kind of similar to what I said earlier, right? With social, natural, and cultural capital being the most abundant forms of capital in our region. What we kept hearing is, how do we sustain this and honor it so that we're protecting people, heritage, and landscape, while also welcoming in innovation, growth, new people, new ideas? Like both can be true. And I think that's what the region is really asking for. And then this piece around making sure that we are protecting our natural capital. It's really easy to come in and say, oh, it's a very rural region. There's lots of space to grow, lots of space to expand. But how do we make sure that our one of our greatest assets, our forests and our waters and our mountains are protected so that this doesn't become a place that, oh yeah, it used to have a beautiful outdoor landscape, or that's overrun now. We need to invest in that. We need to create the sort of plans that support our natural assets and integrate this climate mitigation piece and adaptation piece in that, quite honestly, I don't believe anyone really had the capacity to do in the last 2 years. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen in just a moment and give the talking stick over to Nathan. What we want to share now is some like what's emerged. We didn't just create a plan to say, here's a plan, ta-da, best of luck region. We wanted to like start talking with partners, start looking internally at North Country Council around what is our capacity to tackle some of these issues, and where are we receiving support as a planning commission to start addressing some of these. So Nathan's going to talk for a few minutes about the business resource roadmap. Kayla's going to give you an update on housing, which could be its own presentation. And then I'll talk a little bit about food and agriculture and what's next, which is what I'm going to call resiliency 2.0. So let me stop sharing my screen for a moment and turn it over to Nathan.
Great, thanks, Stacy, and welcome everybody. Very happy to be part of this entire plan and the interworkings of it and gathering of data and all of that. As Stacy alluded to, we're really tasked with pulling together the small business community. I do that in a number of ways through my business, Cardinal Consulting. We are strategy and growth consultants for really any size business, but of course, most 99% of our businesses here in New Hampshire are small businesses per the definition. So here we are. And we did have kind of our hands in a lot of the data gathering throughout this process, again, pulling together a number of small business folks from within the region and doing a lot of communications to get folks in various types of small businesses, but really that was one sector, as Stacy alluded to. So we had a number of conversations. We held some focus groups, a lot of individual conversations, just talking about assets and needs in the region, talking about their experiences through COVID and the depths of the pandemic. And as you could probably suspect, a lot of that was there was some positive. A lot of our businesses have done very well from an economic standpoint. That's positive, and but obviously there's other pieces and other challenges, especially for growth, whether that means employees or capital or things like that. So throughout the entire conversation, we were hearing and documenting when people said, "I need," or "I don't have," or "I need help with," or "What's the best resource for?" Fill in the blank, as it were. So I said to the team at the council at one point, I said, there's a lot of data that we have. there's a lot of things that I think we could do, knowing that this is an element or a piece of the work that they do, that they are not all of a sudden going to become small business counselors and all of that. But there's all of these resources that exist, right, in the state, in the region. So we were able to, long story short, not only initially assist a number of those businesses with making connections, whether it was, for a local banking relationship, or the right person to talk to for marketing assistance, or just general business counseling and advice. But we were also really focused on making sure that all of that there was a sustainability element to it as well, so that once this plan was out, and once all of the information was out for everyone, that there was also a document, or a tool, as it were, that would assist a small business owner in really whatever phase of their business that they are in, kind of planning and finding the right resources to do that planning. And so, Stacy, I don't know if you have the ability to pull up. She does. I love it. Beautiful. So we thanks, of course, to the council for doing their design work and getting this to a place where it matched their brand, but also made it easy for folks to use. It is basically, as we said, a roadmap. It's set up that way with a few mile markers. So if you're starting a business, right, if you are, and a few pieces within that, if you are planning and preparing for the future of your business, whatever that means, maybe it's growth, maybe it's just an element of things, maybe you're just getting you're going from a solopreneur to a larger organization, or maybe you need to close your business, or sell your business, or retire, so we said, well, let's set it up that way. Let's kind of pick a few of the really important pieces, and then give folks access to resources. And so we designed the document. Really quickly, on the right hand side, all of the blue within the PDF document is actually linked. So if you're in there, you click on that, and it's going to bring you to a particular area, or the rest of the document, the actual resources. Business assistance organizations like SCORE, like the CWE and SBDC, that have obviously regional presence, but are statewide organizations assisting small businesses. And then, of course, our regional development corps, our RDCs, our regional planning commissions as well. And let me see, yeah, we'll just keep going right through it. Of course, the state of New Hampshire has a number of resources as well, whether that's through the BEA, or the PTAC for federal contract assistance, employment security. We wanted to make sure that we really made that it was comprehensive in this way. We included some business incubators and co-working space, because that's important. Moving out of the basement office, as it were. I joke about my basement office, that's why I say that. But moving out of that space into a collaborative space, or having a space that you can get out of your work from home situation and collaborate, or do things differently. And there are a number of those organizations right here in the region. So of course, the Small Business Administration is listed there as well. And then a number of professional assistance referrals. And the reason we did that, well, and chambers too, but let me talk about professional assistance referrals for just a second. The reason we did that is because we didn't want to say, well, we know a really great business broker, or we know a really great lawyer. We wanted to give you, the business owner, the opportunity to go through an organization that maybe gives that individual some clout, that they're a member of, that an industry association, and then find the person or the organization that is right for you, because who I love is not who you love, as it were. So you'll see that professional assistance referrals as a website or an organization you can go to then find, again, the right person or organization for you. And of course, as a former chamber exec, I couldn't leave the chambers off of the list. There are so many in the region, especially through COVID, doing a lot of great stuff. not just for our tourism economy, but for economic development, for planning, for a number of things, again, throughout the region. So that is this document. It will live on the council's website. It is part of, or an element of, the plan. And the great thing is that it's a PDF, it's interactive, it's printable as well, so you can just simply have it on your desk. We know we passed it through the Small Business Development Center and their team there, and they said this is great. We're using this type, we're using this document already. They basically said we're using a number of these resources already, or there's additional that their team, their advisors can work with small businesses on. So it's been a great process. This was very much a sort of culmination of a lot of understanding of different things within the small business sector, and now it's alive. So there it is.
Thanks so much, Nathan. I also want to say too, Nathan was really great with working with our team to ensure that we captured all of the stories from the folks that he was talking to and interviewing. So when you go to the North Country Rising webpage, there's 2 short videos. One is kind of an overview of the North Country Rising process. The second one, that's about 12 minutes long, has businesses in our region that we interviewed and in their stories of who they work with, what was working, where were they most challenged. So, maybe on tomorrow's lunch break, take some time to watch those videos if you haven't already. Now, and this will be a challenge for Kayla because there's enough to talk about in housing for us to stay online through dinner tonight. But she's going to give us a quick update on some of the things that she's working on in housing, which again was a major topic that came up across sectors and is part of that common theme of supporting community backbone systems and supporting the workforce so that we can grow and support the economy. So Kayla, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then I'll pull up the slides as you're getting started.
Awesome. Sounds great. So thank you guys all for being here with us today. Thank you guys for letting me be here with you today. And I'm going to jump right in and say, I think I'd be surprised if anybody on the call would be thinking it's news to hear that we've had some housing challenges in the region. They're not unique to the region entirely, right? We've seen housing issues coming up since the pandemic related to interest rates, mobility of people. A lot's just been going on about how funding is used, how investors are investing, and where people are living and who they're living with, right? It's all been shifting. And all that shifting has really highlighted and brought to sort of the forefront some of the shortcomings and issues we had in our housing markets to begin with. Something you'll hear me say probably too many times if you're in meetings with me is, if you're a planner, you're really good at shining up a problem from like 50 different angles. And so I'm not going to shine up the housing problem here. I'm going to take it as a given. There is a wonderful publication on New Hampshire Housing's website, which is a housing needs analysis of the North Country. We're coming out shortly with our regional housing needs assessment, which is a little bit more of a community by community accounting of numbers and price points and how we're sort of stacking up and doing things. But so there's a lot of places to go and hear about it. I'm going to talk in a couple of minutes about where we've been going, because as Stacey sort of has laid the groundwork for with the North Country Rising plan, at the council, we sort of wholeheartedly take this view that it's not just enough to write the plan and ask people to implement it. We need to see how we show up and be those helpers of implementation or the doers. So I'm here to talk to you about a couple of the spaces we're sort of doing in around housing, mostly as just so you know what's going on, right? Where are we headed and where do we see this going? Who's coming to the table and kind of what's up? So what you see here on this slide before you is a mind map of mine that takes these handful of key issues we've teased out, I think, more than uncovered over the last few years. And then what we've really done is I've taken sort of some of the work we're doing and lined it up with what it's kind of supporting here. So from those key issues we found one specific one that I'm going to talk about first, and it's my blue bubbles to the left of the screen. It's about the lack of awareness and a lack of buy-in for sort of the comprehensive solutions it can take to address the housing conundrum we've got ourselves in, with a declining housing stock, an aging housing stock, a lack of diversity in our housing stock, and a real challenge with whose hands the housing is actually in. And so one thing we've launched through this is a project we call employer assisted housing engagement, because I'm nowhere near as good at good names as Stacy is. So I don't have a good name for this one, but it's employer assisted housing. And what we're doing is we're working in 3 labor market areas across the region to help businesses figure out how they become investors or solution drivers in local housing needs. So one of the places we heard about housing to do it a little differently recently has been through businesses. Some of the best advocates right now for housing are those businesses that have a hard time keeping staff or finding people to fill positions. And they're really finding that our small businesses can be wage constrained and our housing costs are going up. And the balance in the math is getting real tough on sort of everybody. So what we're doing in that is we're kind of providing support to groups of these employers so that we don't just trip over the same roadblock, right? So that the businesses, we're bringing them together to say, how do you support something if you've got $5,000, and how do you support something if you've got 5,000 grand to throw at a housing problem? And starting to sort of normalize those conversations about businesses needing to be part of the solution, but it being a little bit different than the company towns of yesteryear. And so that's been really neat. It's been great work because what we've been doing is helping them liaise with the development community, be that nonprofit, for-profit, to figure out how do you sort of engage in this world, because it's not their day job, right? Most of the businesses in the area are not housing focused. And so they're kind of in this area a little bit ancillary to what they normally do, but they're really, really, really finding it to be super impactful. And we're trying to help be a middleman to bring together the communities, so the municipalities with the rules, the developers with the know-how to do it, the landowners with the property to do it, and the investors potentially now being some of these employers who are figuring out how to enter this. And it's a different game for different people, right? Small business is a wide term, as Nathan sort of alluded to, right? A lot of times we use less than 500 employees, and the scale of that investment can be super different, from the pizza man to a hospital, right? And the point is that when there's interest and there's need, we need to make a seat at the table for that and help them see how they can lift up the situation for their current employees or for the employees they need. That has been super neat work. Right now it's hot and moving in Littleton, in Gorham and Berlin, there's some work going on. Some stuff's been going on in Colebrook, and most recently sort of the Lincoln area, which if you think about our region, it's not surprising to hear that those sort of employment hubs are where we're seeing some action come on that space. A little quieter in the Mount Washington Valley, but that's mostly because they have some specific organizations over there who lean in that space. The second piece about sort of what we're doing from here is my red bubbles. So the red bubbles go to, and this slide is a little too small for you guys to see, but I tried to be cute and number things to the problems that lined up here. So in your spare time, maybe, Friday's lunch, you could take a peek and see what these key issues were and how they lined up. But the other piece we're working in is that there's a real lack of capacity for implementing solutions at a local level. Who's surprised here if they think that the city hall in their hometown up in the North Country is quite a bit smaller than that in Concord? They're really small. They get smaller and smaller depending on where you are. And with that sort of shrinking of community size, we find that there's this capacity to tackle these housing challenges starts to diminish too. And while you might be really aware that the problem is big in your community, the idea of how to really study it, know it, and see where to intervene in it needs to get coached up a little bit so that people really feel like they're competent to do that work in their communities. So we've been doing individual municipal kind of ad hoc assistance. We've been working with, recently we just did something helping the Woodstock Select Board set some norms around affordable housing terminology when they were having a difficult public conversation about investment and grant funding. We were very lucky to put forward a congressionally designated project through Congresswoman Custer that was funded. That's a program we call Housing Ready. And Housing Ready is a concept program where we will go into communities and help them see how they can address the housing challenge in front of them. Instead of sort of the way we typically do it in the state, we tend to have funding available for specific types of changes, say Right now, there's a pretty good pot of money available for regulatory change in New Hampshire. But if you're a town without regulations, how do you enter into that space? Because you might still have problems even if you don't have any ordinances. So Housing Ready is a program where we're going to land in 5 or 6 communities to do a lot of deep conversation around housing, but to tease out a solution they'd like to see pursued in that community and help lay the groundwork of where it can go. And then the last piece is this regional housing needs assessment, which I spoke at the beginning. The regional housing needs assessment is a state statute requirement for us, but it is a piece where we drill down to future population projections in different scenarios in different communities and start to say, what is your population potentially going to look like in the future? And without change, where are you going to end up? How do you sort of tool yourself up to address this best? So that's kind of the space we're in. We're balancing this balance between working with the employers on how to invest and working with the municipalities on how they can create the ripe opportunities for that investment. This was my second slide, which is really just a teaser for you guys. So if you do find the time to check out that New Hampshire housing publication, which was a joint effort between North Country Council, New Hampshire Housing, and an small economist group out of Maine, we came up with sort of 9 sort of main ways to address these issues. And the ones I talked about on the last slide are where we're finding ourselves leaning in, but I would invite you all to look at this and see if there's a space where you can lean in as well, because it takes a lot of hands. And with that, I will hand it back to Stacy.
Great, thanks so much, Kayla. And Kayla, where can folks view this information? Is this available on our website or a place that they can go if they want to read up on this a little bit more?
That's a great question. I think you can find it on our website, but I'm about to put it in the chat to everybody, a link to that report.
Perfect, thanks. So just, I think 3 more slides if you can, and I understand if you have to go, but there's some other important stuff going on that I'm working on that I think is kind of exciting, and I want to share it with you as we're wrapping up. As I said, what kind of happened, we pulled together these focus groups and pulled people together to have conversations. Some folks had those conversations and then, we get back to our busy lives. First of all, I'm here to say, if you're still on the call and you want to talk about collaboration in your sector, there's been some development, you're working together on some specific project development and you need some help or need someone to help facilitate the conversation, please reach out. Food and agriculture has started to do that. What I'm sharing on the screen is some of the big ideas that were coming out of the food and agriculture focus group conversations we were having. The first was, why don't we develop a North Country Food Council? To go to that first big common theme I shared of collaboration and collective impact, our farmers are super busy, usually March through early November. And then I would hope take a really long winter nap before starting it all over again. So we intentionally held our focus group meetings over the winter. And there was sort of this, I wish that there was a collaborative structure or something that represented all of us, that kept going even when we're in the fields, planting the seeds, harvesting the seeds, and putting the food away and getting it to the customers. So a food council is a concept that has happened all over the country. I think there's like 13 of them in Maine. We have 2 of them in southern New Hampshire. And so that came up as an idea. Integrating food and agriculture into our educational system came up. Like, why? Farming is another, like our trades industry, it's another sector of our economy where we're starting to see people age out and not the same number of people coming in. If we can't feed our workforce, there is no workforce. So it's really, really important for us, starting in K through 12, all the way up through college, to have opportunities for people to learn how to grow food, how to be a farmer, and then rely on some of our other educational programs that happen through UNH Cooperative Extension or Taproot to be, here's another avenue for learning about growing food. We need to inventory our existing food and agriculture infrastructure. Again, not just where are things, but how are they doing? What do we need? One story that emerged was the food pantry was delighted to receive, I think it was something like 500 pounds of frozen pork from USDA during the pandemic, but they're looking at it going, we don't have a freezer for 500 pounds of pork. So there was a lot of calling around of who has the freezer so the food doesn't go bad. If we had an inventory, if we knew what we had and where you could store, or commercial kitchen spaces. So that part needs to get done. And then there's this whole help and support for the next generation of farmers. Everything from not just the training that I mentioned, but what are some of the policies and some of the things that are challenging as you're starting out? The cost of land, where are we going to grow more food? And there's a lot more to this conversation, but again, the food and ag folks kept calling me and saying, we need to continue this conversation. So we have. We developed a small food and agriculture task force, some folks that did have the time to keep the conversation going over the last couple of months. We've had a couple of conversations and intend to have more with our healthcare partners who have also put, the fact that people don't have access to healthy, local, nutritious food is part of the healthcare problem as well. And they've identified that plan. So, food access and equity is a part of this conversation. So they need to be a part of the conversation. We also talked with UNH and the Vermont Law School, who is developing a food system resiliency tool. This is a tool that would help a region like ours figure out what to assess and how to assess. And what are some things we might have not even thought about gathering as data that's really important to tell us about the resiliency of the food system. And they asked the North Country specifically to review the tool and give them feedback on whether this tool actually works in a rural area or not. We have talked to and identified both state and private donors who are at the ready when we are ready to submit large federal grant applications for the industry. As many of you know, those typically include match. So I've been reaching out to our partners around the state saying, when we're ready, when we have come together within food and agriculture and developed a proposal that is a collaborative proposal, again, going back to that collective impact, how is it benefiting all and how are all working together? Can you come to the table with match dollars? And we have folks that are ready to do that. The biggest and most exciting thing I can say is that what we decided, I think this was back in the spring of this year, was what if we intentionally created a space to invite everyone within the industry to come back together to go over these topics right here that I just shared, because I can sit here as a planner at my desk and try to solve these issues, but it's the industry that needs to be at the table. They need to tell us what works, what doesn't work. How can the Planning Commission support them? How can other organizations that provide food and agriculture technical assistance shift their programs or planning to address exactly what those that work in the industry are saying that they need? So on November 1st, we are hosting the first North Country Food and Agriculture Summit. Invitations have already gone out to about 60 to 70 people within our food and agriculture industry. We are hoping to have other people join us as well. And I know some people on the call are excited about being there, but please be patient. We have, I think, limited space to about 70 people that can be part of the summit. And we want to make sure that we are lending those seats to the farmers first, and the people that work at the food pantries, distribution, processing, our food co-ops and food stores first. And then if we still have space, we definitely would love to have folks in the community and folks that have been part of the North Country Rising process also join us on November 1st. So there'll be more information about this in our upcoming newsletter, and you'll see where you can register for the event probably in about a week from now. The last thing that I wanted to share before wrapping up today is that we also, I'm very happy to announce, we received another source of funding and support through the Economic Development Administration, through the most recent round of funding, the ARPA funding, the Economic Adjustment and Assistance Grant, for what I'm calling right now, this is not to be like quoted, but Resiliency 2.0. We want to keep the conversation going. So this allows us to continue to assist and facilitate those collaborative, collective impact conversations, both within the sector, like we're doing with the Food and Ag Summit, but also across sector. So if you're on the call and you're like, wow, I remember conversations we had for healthcare or for arts and culture, and I think there's a couple of us that are ready to do this thing, and you need some assistance, please reach out to me because we have the means to help in some capacity. It also means that we are going to take the time to integrate in the climate resiliency piece. I had the great fortune of speaking with both the Mount Washington Observatory and the AMC last year, and we have partners in UNH that all have great reports and studies that they want to get into the hands of industry leaders and community leaders to begin the conversation of how do we become more resilient in the changing climate that we are already experiencing up here. There are studies that show what the economic impact will have in our winter months, as well as some studies of what's already happening in the White Mountain National Forest that we need to be paying attention to. So this allows us to, once again, bring together the scientists and the people that do this for a living with those decision makers out in the community and work together to come up with a plan at the community level, at the business level, and at the regional level that makes sense. And then the last piece of this is, Kayla and I've talked about this, our SEDS committee will be doing their 5-year rewrite of the economic development strategy for our region this upcoming year. And we want to talk about how do we measure that collective impact and how do we measure all 8 forms of community capital so that as we're helping projects develop, as we're helping you guys find grants, as new things are emerging, that we're able to actually measure that. You know, if it's not just dollars and cents and number of jobs, sometimes it seems more qualitative data. We want to see how do you turn that qualitative data into quantitative data. So we're going to try to work on that some as well. This work will be happening over probably the next 18 months. You know, it is based a little bit on our capacity as an organization. There's a lot of work we're tackling right now, but this is going to start up this fall and winter so that you'll still hear me saying resiliency next year as well, and hopefully working with all of you to build that resiliency in our region. I believe everyone has this, but before I stop sharing my screen, I wanted to just one more time say, please reach out to me, sdahl@nccouncil.org, with any questions, thoughts, insights. We also, I think it's important to say that this plan is not a plan that will be just implemented by North Country Council. We are a planning council. You know, our job is to help facilitate and assist those that are doing the work. And yes, we do the work as well, but this is going to take all of us. So if you're reading through the plan, or there's sections today that we talked about that you said, oh, you know, we've got a group that are working on that. We want to hear your story. We want to connect you with other people who are doing that work in the region. And if you run into something where you say, you know, we're looking for a resource, or we're ready to apply for a federal grant and we need some help with that, let us know. We're hoping that everybody is involved in implementing the plan. This is the link to the website where you will find the full plan document, as well as the case studies that Emily did last summer, and the business resource roadmap that Nathan shared, and the 2 videos that I talked about earlier, all reside on this website.